Position. Table of contents: Chamaepoece half-hardy perennial thistle plants of little merit. Any soil suits them, and they may be increased by seed or division. Flower in June. Height, 2 feet to 3 feet. Chamaerops, Schusen palm, fine greenhouse plants, delighting in a rich, loamy soil. Height, 10 feet. Cheiranthus sea wallflower. Chelidonium. This hardy perennial will flourish in any garden soil, flowers in May, and may be increased by division. Height, 2 feet. Chelone charming hardy herbaceous plants. Succeed well in a mixture of peat and loam or any rich soil. Increased by division of root, or by seed treated like other hardy perennials. They are very effective for the center of beds, or in groups. Bloom in July. Height, 3 feet. Cherries a light, rich soil is the one that cherries succeed in best, though they will grow in any fairly good dry ground. The position should be open, but at the same time sheltered, as the blossoms are liable to be cut off by spring frosts. The planting may be done at any time during November and the beginning of March, when the ground is in a workable condition. Cherries are often worked upon the Mahaleb stalk. As they have a tendency to gumming and canker, the knife should be used as little as possible, but where pruning is necessary, let it be done in the summer. If gumming occurs, cut away the diseased parts and apply Stockholm tar to the wounds. Aphids or black fly may be destroyed by tobacco dust and syringing well with an infusion of soft soap. Morello succeeds on a north wall. Bigarreau, Waterloo, Black Eagle, Black Tartarian, Mayduke, Whiteheart, and Kentish are all good sorts. Bush trees should stand 10 feet apart, standards 30 feet. Cherry, Cornelian, C. Cornus moss. Cherry pie C. heliotrope. Chervil for summer use sow in March, and for winter requirements in July and August, in shallow drill 6 or 8 inches apart. Cut for use when 3 or 4 inches high. The tender tops and leaves are used in soups and stews, to which they impart a warm, aromatic flavor. They likewise give piquancy to mixed salads. Chestnuts to raise trees from seed. Sow the nuts in November, about 2 inches deep. When 2 years old they may be transplanted to their permanent site. The only pruning they require is to cut away any branches which would prevent the tree forming a well-balanced head. Chicory sow in May or June in drills of rich soil, and thin out to 6 inches apart. In autumn lift the roots and store them in dry sand. To force leaves for salads, plant the roots closely together in boxes or large pots, with the tops only exposed, using ordinary soil. Place table of contents in a temperature of 55 degrees, and keep in the dark. Long blanched leaves will soon appear, ready for use. Chili same treatment as capsicum. Chimonanthus fragrans, Japan allspice, this delightfully fragrant hardy shrub, known as the winter flower, produces its blooms in January before the leaves appear. Should sharp frosts set in, protection ought to be given to the flowers. The plant requires a fairly good soil, and is most at home when trained against a wall. It is generally propagated by means of layers. Height, 6 feet. Chinese sacred narcissus, oriental lily, joss flower, or flower of the gods, the Chinese emblem of good luck. This is a very beautiful variety of the Polyanthus narcissus, and is grown to bloom at the advent of the Chinese New Year. It is very fragrant and free-blooming, and is generally flowered in an ornamental bowl of water, the bulb being surrounded with pretty pebbles to keep it well balanced. It may also be grown in a pot of mold, kept in a dark place for about 10 days, then placed in a sunny position and supplied with water. It flowers from 6 to 8 weeks after planting. Cheonanthus virginica, fringe tree, a curious shrub which is best raised from seed. It succeeds in any soil, and bears white flowers in July. It will grow to the height of 20 feet or more. Chionodoxa lucilii, glory of the snow, a pretty hardy spring flowering bulbous plant. The blossoms, from 5 to 6 in number, are produced on gracefully arched stems, 4 to 8 inches high, and are nearly 1 inch across, star-like in form, and of a lovely blue tint on the margin, gradually merging into pure white in the center, fine for growing in clumps. Plant the bulbs in autumn in equal parts of loam, peat, and sand. It succeeds fairly well in the open, but reaches perfection in a cold frame, where the flowers will be produced in March. Height, 6 inches. Koisia ternata, Mexican orange, a pretty evergreen wall plant, bearing sweet-scented white flowers in July. The bush is round, and extremely ornamental when grown in the shrubbery. It delights in a mixture of peat and loam, and is propagated by cuttings placed in sand under a hand glass, or, better still, by layers of the lower branches in March, detaching them in the autumn. While young it makes a fine pot plant. Height, 6 feet. Chrysanthemums. These Australian plants delight in rich turfy peat mixed with fibrous loam, leaf mold, and coarse sand. When freshly potted they should be given a warm part of the greenhouse and watered cautiously till they are in full growth, when a little clear liquid manure may be given twice a week. May be shifted at any time except from October to Christmas. Propagated by cuttings about 1 or 2 inches long of half-ripened young wood taken in July or August, and inserted in sand under a glass. When the pots are full of roots, shift the plants into larger sizes. They bloom nearly all the year round, table of contents especially in the winter and spring. The plants have rather a rambling habit, and are usually trained over balloon or pyramidal trellises, but this trouble can be spared by cutting them back freely and employing a few light sticks to keep them within bounds. Christmas rose. C. Helleborus. Chrysanthemum. The chrysanthemum will grow in any good mold, a naturally good soil being often preferable to an artificial one. Where the ground is not in good condition, a compost may be made of 1/2 rich loam and 1/4 each of well-rotted manure and leaf mold, with sufficient sand to keep it porous. Cuttings taken in November or December make the finest exhibition plants. Pot them singly in 2 inches or 3 inches pots, stand them on coal ashes in a cold frame, and repot them in March or April in 6 inches pots, making the soil moderately firm. When they attain the height of 6 inches, pinch off the extreme point of the shoot, which will induce the growth of side shoots. Shift the plants from time to time into larger pots, until at the end of May they receive their final shift into 10 inches pots, after which they must not on any account be stopped. In June they may be placed in a sheltered and partially shaded part of the open border, standing the pots on pieces of slate to prevent the ingress of worms. Syringe the leaves each day and give the roots a liberal supply of liquid manure. When the flower buds begin to show color, discontinue the manure water. Thin out the flower buds, leaving 2 or 3 only of the strongest on each stem. At the end of September they must be removed to a cool greenhouse to flower. Where there is no greenhouse, a canvas structure may be erected to protect them from the cold. Good plants for the border may be raised from cuttings in March or April. These should be kept close in a frame until rooted, then gradually hardened off, and planted in rich soil. Syringing with soot water twice a week until the flower buds appear will darken the leaves and deepen the color of the flowers. Chrysogonum virginianum. A free-flowering, hardy, herbaceous plant, best grown in loam and peat. Its deep golden, star-shaped flowers are produced from June to September. Cuttings of ripened wood planted in sand and subjected to moist heat will strike. It may also be increased by dividing the root. Height, 1 foot. Cichorium intybus. This is a hardy herbaceous plant producing blue flowers in July. It will grow in any soil and needs no special treatment. Seeds may be sown either in autumn or spring. Height, 2 feet. Sansiffuga. These hardy herbaceous plants will flourish in any good garden soil and are easily raised from seed, or they may be increased by dividing the roots. Various species produce their flowers from May to September. Height, 1 foot to 3 feet. Cinna aureus. These grow well in a soil composed of equal parts of rich loam, leaf mold, and thoroughly rotted horse dung, liberally mixed with sharp sand. they are increased by seed, cuttings, or offsets. The seed should be sown as soon as it is ripe and covered with the table of contents lightest layer of the finest soil, or it may be sown during March on a slight hotbed. Keep the young plants shaded from the sun, and as soon as they can be handled put them into 3 inches pots. Return them to the hotbed and keep them shaded till established, then gradually harden them off, and towards the end of May they may be planted in the open, choosing a sheltered situation. The first flower stem should be cut out close to the bottom, but the side shoots may either be reduced or not. At the end of September place them in a cool frame to bloom during the following month. They require to be well supplied with manure water. As soon as the plants have done flowering, cut them down, and keep them well supplied with water, and in March shake them out of their pots and plant each sucker separately. Other sowings may be made in April and May. To obtain cuttings, when the plants have flowered cut them down, and when they have again grown large enough take the cuttings and plant them in pots filled with the above compost, putting a layer of silver sand on the top. When the cuttings have made shoots 3 inches long, pinch off the tops to make the plants grow bushy. Repot when the roots are well grown, but before they get matted, and give occasionally a little liquid manure. Keep a good lookout for green fly, and as soon as this nuisance appears fumigate the plants with tobacco paper. An excess of fumigation is injurious. Those that have bloomed in pots may be planted in the north border of the garden in July, where they may shed their seed, from which early plants will be produced. They may also be increased by offsets. If the old plants are cut down and kept well watered they will throw up suckers, which may be separated and potted off into thumb pots, transplanting into larger ones when required. They must always be kept shaded from the sun. A cool frame suits them in summer, and being nearly hardy, should never be subjected to a forcing temperature, sufficient heat to keep away frost and damp being all that is necessary. Cinnamon plant. This is a stove or greenhouse plant, and requires a loam and peat soil. Cuttings of the ripe wood strike freely. Cissus orientalis. Useful climbing plants which delight in a light, rich soil. They are increased by cuttings planted under glass and kept in a gentle, moist heat. Cistus, rock rose. A compost of loam and peat suits these beautiful evergreen shrubs. They may be increased by layers, ripe cuttings covered with a hand glass, or seed. Though the plants are pretty hardy it is advisable to afford them protection during severe frosts. June is their flowering month. Height, 3 feet to 6 feet. Citrus japonica. A greenhouse evergreen tree, requiring a rich loamy soil. Very little water should be given it while in a growing state. It is generally budded on an orange or lemon tree and plunged in a bottom heat. June is its flowering season. Height, 5 feet. Cladendus. The annuals may be sown in the open in April to flower in July. The greenhouse evergreens may be propagated by cuttings under glass. These produce flowers in June. Table of contents. Clarkia. These hardy annuals make a pretty display in the borders during summer. Seed ripens plentifully, and merely requires sowing in the open in March, or in September if protected in winter. The bloom lasts from June to September. Height, 18 inches. Claytonia sibirica. A hardy herbaceous plant which yields light yellow flowers in June. It is not particular as to soil, and may be raised from seed sown either in autumn or spring. It stands division of the root. Height, 4 feet. Clematis, Virgin's bower. These plants like a dry situation. They will grow in smoky districts, and may be increased by cuttings of firm side shoots under a glass in summer or by layers in September. With the protection of a greenhouse they come into flower early in spring. They are the most beautiful of all flowering hardy climbers. The stove and greenhouse varieties are best planted in loam and peat, though they will thrive in any light soil. Any good garden soil suits the hardy kinds. The herbaceous varieties are increased by dividing the roots early in spring. They bloom at various periods. After they have ceased to flower, the Jackmanii and Viticella sections should be cut down to within 9 or 12 inches. of the ground. The patens and Florida do not require pruning, those of the lanuginosa should be cut back moderately, but not too close. A good dressing of leaf mold and manure should be dug in about November. Heights vary from 2 feet to 20 feet, see also Traveler's Joy. Cleome - The species of this genus are very pretty and free-flowering, some being half-hardy climbers notable for their foliage. They like a rich, light soil. Cuttings of the stovekines root freely under a glass. Some of the annual species require to be sown in a hotbed frame or in a hothouse, then potted off and placed with tender annuals. The hardier ones may be sown on a hotbed, and afterwards planted out in a sheltered position. They flower in May, June, and July. Heights vary from 6 inches to 8 feet. Clethra alnifolia. This hardy deciduous shrub bears in September deliciously scented pure white flowers on the side shoots of the previous year's growth. It needs a light soil and a dry, sunny situation. It may be propagated by cuttings placed under glass in sandy loam, or by suckers taken when the leaves have fallen, but is more generally increased by layers. Height, 3 feet. Cleanthus - A genus of very elegant, free-flowering, evergreen greenhouse shrubs. They flourish in the border of the conservatory, or against a south wall if protected from cold, in an equal mixture of loam, peat, and sand. Cuttings root freely in the same soil under glass. Seeds sown early in spring produce flowers the first year, in May. Height, 3 feet to 4 feet. Clintonia. Very pretty half-hardy annuals, useful for beds, edging, pots, or rockwork. They produce an abundance of lobila-like flowers in August. Sow the seed in the open in spring. Height, 6 inches. Table of contents. Clitoria. A greenhouse climbing or trailing plant, which thrives in a mixture of loam, peat, and sand. Cuttings will strike in heat, but it is more readily grown from seed. Clivias, kaffir lilies, most beautiful evergreen plants for the greenhouse. The soil most suitable for them is a compost of leaf mold, loam, and sand. Give a liberal supply of water when in full growth, but from September to February keep them only moderately moist. Shade from strong sunshine, and keep the temperature at from 60 to 70 degrees. They will not bear much disturbance. Seed may be sown in bottom heat early in spring, or they may be increased by suckers. Cobea scandens - This rapid climber is well adapted for the conservatory, but it will thrive in the open air if the root is protected during the winter. If planted against a rough wall, its tendrils will catch in the crevices and support it without any assistance. It requires plenty of room and a rather poor soil, otherwise it runs to leaf instead of to bloom. The tops of the shoots should be constantly pinched off, to induce thickness of growth. Cuttings of firm side shoots taken in summer will root under glass in a little moist heat, but it is best raised from seed, sown sideways, in a hotbed in March. Its blue and purple flowers are produced in August. Height, 10 feet to 20 feet. Cob nuts - C. filberts. Coxcomb. These tender annuals should be sown on a moderate hotbed in March or April, in pans of leaf mold and sand, covering with 1/4 in of soil. When a couple of inches high, place them in small pots, replace them on the hotbed, and give shade till they have taken fresh root. When the weather is favorable, let them have a moderate amount of fresh air. Afterwards shift them into larger pots, and when the combs are full grown, place them in the greenhouse, taking care not to allow any damp to lodge on them, at the same time supplying them well with water and all the air possible. Height, 9 inches. See also Celosia. Codano size. These hardy perennials are best grown in sandy peat and loam. They are easily raised from seed or cuttings, and produce their flowers in July and August. Height, 1 foot. Koiolacrima, Job's tears, A half-hardy, annual, ornamental grass-bearing clusters of beautiful pearl-like seeds. Sow in a warm spot in April, barely covering the seed with fine soil, and keep the surface of the ground moist till germination is ensured. Height, 1–1/2 feet. Colchicum, autumn flowering crocus, Plant the bulbs in February in light, loamy soil, placing them 2 inches deep and 3 inches apart. They are readily increased by offsets from the bulb. September is their flowering season. Height, 3 inches. See also Bulbocadium. Coleus - tender perennial shrubs of some merit, requiring the table of contents protection of a greenhouse. Keep the plants root-bound and near the glass, with a good supply of heat and moisture. They succeed best in a mixture of loam and peat. Cuttings of shoots 3 inches long, planted in sand, covered with a glass, and plunged in heat 60 to 70 degrees, will strike. Pot off singly in loam and sand. Bloom in June or July. Height, 2 feet to 3 feet. Colotia - ornamental evergreen shrubs. A mixture of peat and loam, with a sheltered position, is their delight. Cuttings will strike in sand if covered with glass. They produce their flowers in July. Height, 2 feet to 3 feet. Collinsia. Most elegant hardy annuals, doing well in any garden soil. The seed is sown in autumn for early flowering, and in spring for a later display. Bloom May to August. Height, 1 foot. Colomia - hardy annuals, possessing little beauty. Treat as Collinsia. Flower in July. Height, 1 foot to 2 feet. Coltsfoot - this hardy perennial flowers before the leaves appear. It grows best in a moist, clayey soil, and may be increased by pieces of the running root. Columbine - C. Aquilegia. Collidia arborescens, bladder senna, dot. A shrub with acacia-like leaves and producing yellow pea-shaped flowers in July, followed with bladder-shaped seed vessels. It will grow in any soil, and may be raised either from seed or cuttings taken in autumn. Height, 10 feet. Commelina celoina, blue spiderwort, or dayflower, dot. A pretty greenhouse climber, bearing cobalt blue flowers. It should occupy a sunny position, and be watered freely from March to September, after which very little should be given. Commelina tuberosa - perfectly hardy plants, bearing in June blue or white flowers the size of a shilling. The bulbs may be planted in spring in any garden soil. The plants are increased by offsets. Height, 1–1/2 feet. Compost heap - get a heap of dead leaves and press and jam them down as closely as possible. Then take as much manure, in appearance, as you have dead leaves, and for each cartload have 2 bushels of unslaked quicklime and some earth. Now spread upon the ground, in some out-of-the-way corner, a layer of the dead leaves, upon which sprinkle a layer of lime, and over that a thin layer of earth. Next lay on a covering of manure, then a layer of leaves, and one of lime and earth as before, and proceed in this way till all the materials are used up. It will be well, however, to give the heap a good watering whenever you come to the layer of leaves. This slakes the lime and hastens the decomposition of the vegetable matter. After letting it stand for about 6 weeks, begin at the top of the heap and turn it completely over, so that what was at the bottom will be at the top. Repeat this table of contents operation from time to time at intervals of 6 or 7 weeks, until it has become perfectly friable and will powder through a garden fork like dust. It will then be ready for use. This compost is invigorating to flowers of all kinds, and is so ready for them to assimilate. Comptonia esplenifolia - this ornamental deciduous shrub is quite hardy, but requires a light, sandy loam or peat soil and a shady situation. It is increased by layers. Blooms in April. Height, 4 feet. Coneflower - C. echinacea. Conifers - conifers, so called because they bear cones in place of ordinary seed, are mostly of tall growth, yet among the class are many low-growing evergreens well adapted for the lawn or border. Indeed, any of the specimens may be utilized in this way, but of course must be removed from the shrubbery or border before they attain undue proportions. They are hardy, and, generally speaking, not particular as to soil or situation. Firs, pines, cedars, etc. come under this heading, and mention is made in other parts of this work of those most suitable for the amateur's requirements. Convallaria prolificans. This is one of the most beautiful hardy perennials known. It has large, deep green foliage, with erect and much branched flower stems. The flowers are white, internally flushed rose, are very fragrant, and are produced from May to September. The plant will grow in any ordinary soil, and may be increased by dividing the root. Height, 2-1/2 feet. Convolvulus, morning glory, showy plants. The tender species are well adapted for the stove or conservatory, and are best grown in loam and peat. Cuttings strike freely in sand under a glass. The half-hardy annual kinds should be sown on a gentle hotbed in February, and when large enough transferred to the open. Or they may be sown in the open in April. Hardy kinds merely require sowing in the open, early in spring. The stove and greenhouse annuals and biennials require to be sown in heat, and treated as other stove and greenhouse annuals and biennials. Flowering season, May to July. Height, 6 inches to 15 feet. Coral plant C. erythrina. Corchorus C. caria. Cordyline A. stove evergreen shrub, which may be grown in any light vegetable mold or in peat and loam, and is easily increased by suckers. It flowers in spring. Height, 3 feet. Coreopsis very pretty and long flowering. They all like a light, rich, and sandy soil. Cuttings of the stove kinds root freely under glass. Hardy perennials may be divided at the roots. The annuals may be sown either in the autumn or in March, they bear transplanting. Longipes flowers in April, grandiflora in August. Useful as cut flowers. Height, 1-1/2 feet to 3 feet. Table of contents. Cornel C. cornus. Cornflower C. cyanus. Corn salad, lamb's lettuce, sow in drills the plants to stand 6 in. Apart from March till August, in well-drained sandy loam. Autumn sowings will stand the winter and prove useful in early spring. It must be gathered young. Cornus canadensis, Canadian cornel, a pretty herbaceous plant, suitable for moist parts of rock work. It is very hardy, likes a light soil, and produces flowers from June to August. The roots may be divided in autumn, or in the early part of spring. Height, 8 inches. Cornus moss, Cornelian cherry, this hardy deciduous shrub does well in common soil if a fair amount of moisture be given. Its yellow flowers are produced on bare stems from February to April. It may be increased by seeds, cuttings, or layers, autumn being the time to propagate. Coronilla the greenhouse shrubs should be grown in peat and loam. They are raised by seeds and by cuttings. Most of the hardy perennials need protection in winter, therefore they are best grown in pots. These are propagated by seed or division. The annuals need no special treatment. Coronilla iberica a pretty creeping hardy perennial suitable for rock work, on which its bright yellow flowers are very attractive during June and July. It thrives best in a mixture of peat and loam, and may be increased by seeds or division of the roots. Height, 6 inches. Corea cardinalis an evergreen greenhouse shrub. Place in equal parts of sand and loam, and propagate by cuttings, which should have plenty of room, as they are liable to damp off. July is its flowering season. Height, 4 feet. C. magnifica is also a capital plant. Cordyceps mathioli. This ornamental hardy herbaceous plant thrives best in a mixture of peat and loam. It is advisable to give protection to the roots in winter. It may be increased by seeds or by division of the roots. It makes a good pot plant, and produces flowers in May and June. Height, 1 foot. Corydalis, fumitory, These low-growing perennials are suitable for dry positions on rock work. They are not particular as to soil, and may be increased by division of roots, while some scatter seed in abundance. Their flowering period extends over many months. Height, 6 in. to 1 foot. Cosmea bipinnata a very pretty half-hardy annual which flowers in July. Sow the seed early in spring on a slight hotbed covered with glass, and transplant to the flower border at the end of May. Height, 2 feet. Table of contents. Cosmos. Pretty plants, the flowers resembling a single dahlia. They are mostly hardy, but some need protection. The annuals should be raised on a hotbed in February and be planted out in May. The perennials, too, are brought forward in heat. Some flower in June, others in September. Height, 1 foot to 3 feet. Cotoneaster - evergreen shrubs which will grow in any soil and are easily increased by layers. C. hookeriana attains the dimensions of small trees, and produces a profusion of white flowers and bright crimson berries. C. simonsii is largely used as a hedge. Height, 6 feet to 8 feet. C. rupestris is a small-leaved, prostrate perennial species, bearing white flowers from May to August, followed by red berries. Height, 3 inches. Cotyledon chrysantha, umbilicus, a choice alpine succulent which thrives in a sandy loam, or in well-drained pots of the same soil. It flowers from May to August, and is multiplied by cuttings, which must be left to dry for a few days in a sunny place. Flowers are produced from May to August. Height, 3 inches. Cow's lips - well-known hardy perennials. These require the same treatment as primulas. Plant in a mixture of loam and peat, and divide as soon as the bloom has died off. Height, 6 inches. Cow's lips, Cape - C. lacinalia. Crambe cordifolia, tournfort, or sea cabbage, this hardy herbaceous plant is suitable for a wild garden. It likes a good, rich soil, and is easily increased by seed or division. August is its flowering period. Height, 3 feet. Cranesbill - C. Geranium argenteum. Crataegus pyracantha, firethorn, this hardy, ornamental shrub will grow in any soil. It should be planted early in spring on a south or southwest wall, and may be increased by seeds, by budding, or by grafting. The profuse brilliant orange-colored berries of the C. Lelandii, Mespalus, ensures it a place on walls and trellises. A sunny position gives best results. Prune in March. Creeping Jenny - C. Lysimachia nummularia. Crepes, hawkweed, an interesting hardy annual. It merely requires sowing in spring, and will grow in any soil. The flowers are produced in June. Height, 1 foot. Cress. Sow at intervals of a week from March to September in the open ground, and during the winter months in frames. A shady position is most suitable. By these frequent sowings, and by often cutting over such as readily renew a bottom growth, a constant succession of tender shoots is obtained. Crocus - among our earliest spring flowers. These will grow in any table of contents garden soil, but prefer rich, sandy earth. Plant in October or November. In deep and 2 inches apart. Take the roots up every second year, and plant the small offsets in a nursery bed for 2 years, when they will be fit for the beds or borders. Protect the bulbs from mice, as they are very partial to them, especially in winter. Indoor culture. Select strong bulbs of the seedling varieties, and plant them in succession, commencing early in autumn, in good, rich, sandy soil. A liberal supply of water is necessary during the blooming season, but perfect drainage must be secured. They grow well in bowls filled with wet moss or sand. Height, 6 inches. See also Colchicum. Crotons - fine-foliaged hothouse plants. A mixture of peat and sandy loam suits their growth, and they require a good amount of light to properly color their leaves, with a night temperature of 70 degrees. Crowe saligna. Charming greenhouse evergreen shrubs, which send forth their purple flowers in September. They grow best in loam and peat. Cuttings may be struck in sand under bell glasses. Height, 3 feet. Crown imperials - C. fritillarias. Crucianella stylosa - a hardy perennial. Sow in August or September in a sheltered spot to stand the winter. The seed may also be sown from March to midsummer, and the plants moved in autumn to the place where they are to bloom. Their delicate pink flowers are produced in July. Height, 1 foot. Cuckoo flower C. cardamine. Cucumbers A. Rich, loamy soil is most suitable for their growth. Sow frame varieties in a heat of 75 degrees or 85 degrees during February and March for summer use, and when the plants are of sufficient size transplant to a well-prepared hotbed. Sow again in September for winter use. The hardy or ridge cucumbers, which are not suited for frame or hothouse culture, should be raised in a frame or hotbed in April, and planted out about the middle of May in a warm border on strawed ridges prepared with good stable manure, placing a hand glass over each plant until it is well established. Cunula mariana, Dittany, This hardy perennial produces heads of pretty purple flowers from July to September. It is not particular as to soil, and can easily be increased by division. Height, 1 foot. Kufia shrubs of a rather pretty description. The stove varieties require a sandy loam to grow in, and may be propagated by cuttings. The annuals should be sown on a gentle hotbed, and when strong enough potted off and kept in the greenhouse, they should not be moved into the open before the end of May. The perennial species, if sown early, make good bedding plants the first year. They need protection in the winter. Currants Black A. Rich, deep soil and a moist situation, together table of contents with partial shade, are most suitable for their growth. They succeed better as bushes than as espaliers or trained to walls. Cuttings of the previous year's growth are taken in autumn and planted firmly 1 foot by 6 inches apart. In 2 years shift every alternate plant so as to allow room for expansion, and plant out finally to a distance of 5 feet. In pruning the bushes, remember that the fruit is borne on the young wood, therefore only sufficient should be cut away to allow of the admission of air and sunshine and the further growth of young branches. A portion of the old wood should be removed each year. Mulch the roots, and keep the plants supplied with water in dry seasons. Baldwin's Black, Ogden's Black, Black Naples, Lee's Prolific, James Prolific, and Old Black are among the best. Red and White in open, sunny position is needed. The soil that suits them best is a deeply manured, stiff loam. They are readily raised from cuttings which should be as long and strong as possible taken in autumn. Cut away all the eyes except the 3 uppermost ones, and plant firmly in rows 1 foot by 6 inches apart. Transplant at the end of the second year to a distance of 5 feet apart. While the plants are young, cut out all the top center branches, cutting always to an outgrowing bud, so as to give a cylindrical form to the bush. In further pruning, leave the leading shoots untouched, but shorten all others to 4 inches or 6 inches, and cut out all old, mossy wood. Towards the end of June is a good time for cutting the young wood away. The fruit is produced on spurs. In the autumn of each year carefully dig in a good dressing of half-rotted manure, in such a manner as not to injure the roots. Among the leading red varieties are the following: Champagne, Cherry, Chiswick Red, Houghton Castle, Raby Castle, and Red Dutch. Of the white fruit, the White Dutch and the cut-leaved white are the leaders. In plantations they should stand from 4 feet to 6 feet apart. Currants, flowering C. Rebes. Cyanthus lobatus, a small, but very beautiful procumbent perennial, well adapted to fill moist places on rockwork if the situation is open and sunny. A mixture of vegetable mold and sand suits it, and it is best increased by cuttings placed in moist peat. It flowers in the autumn, the flower stems being from 6 inches to 1 foot in length. Cyanus, cornflower, very pretty and free-blooming hardy annuals. Sow the seed in the open in autumn for an early display of flowers, or in March for a later one. Thin out to 2 feet apart. Bloom in July. Height, 2 feet to 3 feet. Cyclamen charming winter and spring blooming bulbous greenhouse plants, which thrive in a mixture of sandy loam and vegetable mold. They require a moist atmosphere and a uniform temperature not lower than 50 degrees. They may be increased by seed sown in slight heat as soon as it is ripe. Plant the bulbs in October, also in February and March. placing them so that the crown is level with the top of the pots. One full-sized bulb is sufficient for a 6 inches pot, which must be provided with good drainage and placed on a layer of coal ashes. That table of contents is kept constantly moist. Water moderately till growth begins, then increase the supply. Give a little liquid manure, in a weak state, if a large quantity of flower buds appear. When the blooming season is over, plunge the pots in a shady, well-drained border, and when the leaves start afresh, turn the plants carefully out of the pots, so as not to injure their roots, and repot in fresh soil. C. persicum flowers in February, and C. neapolitanum in April. C. europeum is a hard variety, thriving in any situation. It produces sweetly scented flowers throughout July and August. It does best when planted under trees, or in partial shade on rockwork, in well-drained, good loamy or peaty soil mixed with a fair proportion of brick rubble. Plant the corms in September 3 in apart, and 1–1/2 inches deep. Height, 6 inches to 9 in. Cydonia, Pyrus. These hardy plants are well adapted for trellis work, but are more effective when grown as bushes, and flower more freely than when trained to the wall, the bloom often lasting to the winter. They will grow in any soil, and are increased by suckers. Height, 4 feet, and upwards. Cyperatus alternifolius-A stovegrass, which will grow in any soil, but requires a plentiful supply of water. It is increased by dividing the roots. Height, 2 feet. Cypress, Cupressus. Among these useful conifers, C. lawsoniana has no superior as a single specimen for the decoration of the lawn. Of free growth and perfectly hardy, it succeeds in almost any soil or situation. C. fraserii is also hardy, of erect habit, and of a rich glaucous hue. When it attains a good size, it is very ornamental. The beautiful silver variegated variety Argenteo variegata deserves a place in every shrubbery. Nana alba maculata is a dwarf globular plant, the slender branches of which are tipped with white, giving it the appearance of being partly covered with snow. Pygmea is a compact dwarf growing variety suitable for the center of small beds and for rock work. Japan cypresses are elegant little shrubs, one of the finest being Retinospora ericoides, whose peculiar violet-red leaves contrast charmingly with light green plants. Any of the above may be increased by cuttings. They succeed best in a rich, deep loam, and are improved by thinning out the branches where too thick, and pinching out the stronger shoots where too thin, so as to encourage new growth. Cypripedium, hardy lady slipper orchid. This plant is of the simplest culture and is well adapted for pots, ferneries, or rockwork. It is most at home in a well-drained yet moist peaty soil, and kept in a frame or on a shady border, where it will bloom in June. Protect from frost and heavy rains, but never allow the roots to get dry. Height, 1 foot. Psittacis - elegant hardy shrubs with finely cut leaves and terminal racemes of pea-shaped flowers in July. They will grow in any soil, and are readily raised from seed or layers. Height, 3 feet to 4 feet. Table of contents. D. daffodils - these will grow in any good, cool, moist, well-drained garden soil if sand be put round their roots, but thrive best in a moderately rich loam. They may remain in the ground for years, for large bulbs produce the finest flowers. When the flowering is over, the leaves must be allowed to die down, not cut off. Plant from September to December. The top of the bulb should be about 3 inches below the surface, according to its size, 10 inches apart is a good distance. Daffodils are also suitable for pot culture. Plant 3 to 6 bulbs, according to size, in a 4 inches or 5 inches pot, using a compost of 2 parts fibrous loam, 1 part leaf mold, and 1 part sand. Place the pots on a bed of ashes, and cover with 4 inches of coconut fiber. As soon as top growth has commenced, remove the plants indoors, and give plenty of light and air to prevent them being drawn. Daffodils likewise make a good display when planted on a lawn. Dahlias. These attractive plants require a deep, friable soil, not over-rich. They may be grown from seed sown on a hotbed in March and lightly covered with fine mold. As soon as they are up, give all the air which can with safety be given. When the seedlings are large enough, pot them off singly in the smallest sized pots or round the edges of 6 inches. Ones. Plant them out at the end of May, 1 foot apart. They will flower at the end of August. Any that turn out very good had better be propagated by cuttings from the young tops, to save the kind in case the roots should die. When flowering is over, take up the young bulbs and treat them as directed afterwards for old tubers. Another way to propagate them is to place the old tubers in soil over a hotbed early in March. When the shoots are a couple of inches high, the tubers may be taken up and divided with a sharp knife. Pot off separately. Water them occasionally with liquid manure, made from guano and powdered charcoal, well mixed with rain water, and plant them out early in May. Give them plenty of room, and tie the branches securely to stakes firmly fixed in the soil. When they have become good bushy plants, put a layer of half-rotted manure round each plant. As soon as frost turns their foliage brown, take them up, cut off the roots, leaving about 6 inches of stem attached, and plunge them into a box of sand, chaff, or ashes, and preserve them from damp, frost, and heat during the winter. Daisies, Bellis perennes. These pretty, little hardy perennials are very useful as edgings. To grow them to perfection, the ground should be highly manured, and the roots divided every year, planting them out 6 inches apart in a cool, shady situation. October is a suitable time for transplanting. They flower continuously from February to July. Height, 6 inches. Dandelions. Dandelions on lawns, etc., may be killed by cutting them down as low as possible, and putting a little gas tar or a pinch of salt on the wound. Or they may be dug up and blanched for mixing with salad. In this case, plant 6 roots in an 8 inches pot, and place an table of contents inverted flower pot over the hole. In order to exclude the light, the plants are sometimes blanched in the open by covering them with old tin or fine ashes. The flowers must be kept picked off, for they soon run to seed, and if unattended to become troublesome. Daphne. Beautiful shrubs, mostly evergreens, bearing elegant flowers followed by bright red poisonous berries. D. Mesoreum is the most common variety, and is very suitable for the front of shrubberies. The Chinese variety D. odorata is too tender for outdoors, but makes a fine ornament for the greenhouse. The dwarf kinds, bearing fragrant pink flowers, are rather tender, but are very useful for rock eyries occupying sheltered positions. They all need a peaty soil, and may be increased by grafting onto the common spurge laurel. Different varieties flower at various periods, from February to October. Height, 9 inches to 6 feet, but the majority are from 2 feet to 3 feet high. Datura. Ornamental half-hardy annuals. The seeds of all the species must be sown on a hotbed early in spring. When the plants are strong enough, transplant them in the border, where they will bloom more freely than in pots. The seeds of D. ceratocala will sometimes remain several years in the ground before they germinate. They flower in July. Height, 2 feet to 3 feet. Dayflower. C. camelina. Daylily. C. hemerocallis. Delphinium, larkspur. The gorgeous spikes of flowers produced by these plants render them invaluable for the border. They like a deep soil, highly enriched. The perennials may be divided at the root in autumn, care being taken not to injure the young fleshy sprouts. The annuals are readily raised from seed. The quickest way to grow the perennial varieties from seed is to sow in a frame with a slight bottom heat, at any time from March to August. But sowings made in the open from April to June will succeed. Keep the ground moist, and shade from the sun till the plants are up, then transplant to nursery beds for the summer, afterwards transferring them to their final quarters. Flower in June and July. Height, 1-1/2 feet to 6 feet. Dentaria. Dentata, toothwort, This tuberous hardy perennial grows well in old leaf mold, and is very suitable for the base portion of rockwork, where it can obtain both shade from the midday sun and moisture. It is readily increased by cutting the roots into pieces about 1–1/2 inches long, and replanting them where they are intended to bloom, putting 1 inch or so of sand round them. They flower in May. Height, 1–1/2 feet. Desfontanea spinosa-a fine, evergreen wall shrub with holly-like leaves, and long, pendulous scarlet and orange flowers in June. It grows best in a compost of loam, peat, and sand, with a south or west aspect. It is propagated by cuttings under glass. Height, 10 feet. Desmodium canadense. This is a fine border hardy perennial, producing table of contents long racemes of rosy purple flowers in June or July. It prefers a soil of sandy loam and peat, and may be increased by seed or by cuttings planted in sand and subjected to heat. Height, 4 feet. Desmodium penduliflorum. A hardy evergreen shrub, flowering in July. It thrives in sandy loam and peat. Cuttings planted in sand with a little bottom heat and under glass will strike. Height, 6 feet. Deutzia. A beautiful conservatory shrub, bearing in spring a large quantity of flowers resembling the snowdrop. A peaty soil suits it. It is pretty hardy. Height, 3 feet. Devil in a bush. C. Nigella. Dianthus. Very beautiful and fragrant flowers. The genus embraces carnations, pinks, picotees, and sweet williams. The soil most suitable for them is a light, loamy one, mixed with a little rotten dung and sand. It is well to confine the rarer kind to pots, so as the better to protect them in winter. They are propagated by layers, cuttings, or division of roots. If the cuttings are taken about the middle of June, and placed under glass on a gentle hotbed, they will be ready in about 3 weeks to plant out in the open. The annuals and biennials merely require sowing where they are intended to bloom. Flower in July. Height, 1–1/2 feet to 2 feet. Dictamnus, burning bush. C. fraxinella. Dilitra spectabilis, Venus's car, bleeding heart, or lyre flower. One of the most elegant hardy perennials for forcing for table decorations, or cutting for vases. The graceful, pendant branches are laden with beautiful red or purple heart-shaped flowers. These, combined with the delicate green of the foliage, give them a conspicuous place among plants. Out of doors in summer, among shrubs, or herbaceous plants, they are exceedingly attractive. Let them be planted in tufty groups in a warm, sheltered border of rich, light soil. They may be increased by division of the root, as in the dahlia, or by cuttings. Height, 3 feet. Digitalis, foxglove. Very showy, hardy, perennial border plants. They will grow in any garden soil, and are readily raised from seed, which, if sown in the autumn, will produce flowers the following June and July. Height, 1 foot to 3 feet. Digitata. C. Calurha. Dimorphantus, Aralia sinensis. The Dimorphantus manscuricus is one of the noblest of deciduous shrubs, the foliage being very large and much divided. Any soil is suitable for its growth, and it may be propagated by cuttings of ripe wood, taken at a joint and planted on a shaded site. It produces its flowers at midsummer. Height, 4 feet to 6 feet. Dimorphotheca eclones. This plant is not perhaps quite hardy, still table of contents it may be grown out of doors in a sheltered, sunny situation. It grows well in sandy loam and leaf mold, and requires a good deal of moisture in the summer months, though from autumn till spring it should be kept on the dry side. During winter it is safest to afford it protection. It is generally raised from cuttings late in summer, which are kept through the winter in small pots in the greenhouse. Diphylia cymisa. A very pretty bog plant which blooms from June to August. Plant in rich, light soil, and give plenty of water. It is propagated by division. Height, 9 inches. Diplacus glutinosus, hardwooded mimulus. This elegant greenhouse shrub is an evergreen which delights in a rich, sandy loam. It flowers in June, and is increased by cuttings. Height, 3 feet. Diplopappus dwarf growing evergreen shrubs of pretty habit. The golden stems and leaves of D. Chrysophila render that variety specially attractive. A sandy loam is most suitable for their growth. They require the warmest situation the garden affords, and to be protected during the winter. Cuttings strike readily. They flower in August. Height, 2 feet. Disbudding. The object of disbudding is to prevent the growth of branches which, from their position, would be useless to the tree, and would consequently have to be cut away later on. The process is both simple and expeditious. The trees are gone over once a week during the spring, and the useless buds are rubbed off with the thumb, taking off first those which are most unfavorably situated. The work should be done gradually, so as not to give any check to the tree. The term is also applied to the pinching out of flower buds, such as those of the chrysanthemum, so as to give more room and strength to the remaining blooms. Dissima splendid evergreen climbers, suitable either for the greenhouse or in a sheltered position out of doors. Plant in rich, loamy soil mixed with peat, and, if grown in the open, give protection to the roots during the winter. They flower in July, and may be increased by cuttings planted in sand under glass. Height, 20 feet to 30 feet. Dittany-Secunula. Docks, to kill. Cut the weeds down to the ground, and run a skewer dipped in vitriol through the roots. Dodecatheon-A hardy perennial, which is very ornamental when in flower. It grows best in a loamy soil, and is easily increased by dividing the roots. Blooms in May. Height, 1 foot. Dog's tooth violets. Sea violets. Dolichos lab-half hardy annuals. The seed should be sown in table of contents spring in pots placed in heat, and kept in the hothouse till May, when the plants may be set out in a sheltered position, placing sticks for them to run up, in the like manner to beans. Flower in July. Height, 6 feet. Dondia epipactes-A very pretty and extremely hardy little perennial, suitable for either pot culture or rock work. It thrives in peat or leaf mold, and likes a moist position. Strong clumps may be divided in February, but it is rather shy at being moved. It flowers in May. Height, 6 inches. Doronicum, leopard's bane, an ornamental hardy perennial. It will grow in any garden soil, and may be propagated from seed sown either in the autumn or spring, or by dividing the root. It produces its flowers in May. Height, 1.5 feet. Draba. Pretty dwarf alpine plants which bloom during April and May, very suitable for rock work. They flourish in a compost of loam and peat, and may be propagated by seed or division. Height, 1.5 inches to 3 inches. Dracaena indivisa. A stove evergreen shrub much valued for its foliage and as a table plant. It requires a light, loamy soil, and plenty of light. Cuttings stuck in tan or peat and sand, and provided with strong heat, will strike. It flowers in June. Height, 3 feet. Dracocephalum, dragon's head. Ornamental plants, mostly bearing lilac or blue flowers. Many of the half-hardy kinds are grown in pots, so that they may the more readily be removed to the greenhouse in winter. The perennials are propagated by dividing the roots. The annuals are increased from seed sown in March or early in April. They like a rich, light soil, and come into bloom in June and July. Height, 1 foot to 2 feet. Dracophyllum-greenhouse evergreen shrubs of an ornamental character. The pots should be filled with an equal mixture of sand and peat. They are propagated by planting the young shoots in sand, covering them with a hand glass, and plunging them in heat. They flower in June. Height, 2 feet. Dragon's head-C. Dracocephalum. Dryas octopetala, mountain avens. A prostrate, creeping perennial which bears white anemone-like flowers from July to September. It thrives in peat, and is increased by seeds, cuttings, or division. Not being quite hardy, protection should be afforded during winter. Height, 6 inches. Dutchman's pipe. C. Aristolochia. Table of contents: earwigs, to trap an inverted flower pot, containing a little dry moss or hay, placed on a stick, forms a good trap for these pests. They will also congregate in any hollow stems of plants that may be laid about. They may be destroyed by shaking them into boiling water. Acremocarpus, Calampalus, These climbing half-hardy perennials will grow in any garden soil, a light, loamy one being preferable. Sow the seed in autumn on a slight hotbed, pot off, and winter in a greenhouse. The plants will be ready to turn out on a warm south wall in April or May. Cut them down in the autumn, and cover the roots with dry leaves. They will shoot up again in the spring. The foliage is dark and clematis-like. The flowers are borne in clusters, are tube-shaped, and bright orange-scarlet in color. They are increased by cuttings. Echeveria-choice greenhouse evergreen shrubs. They grow best in a sandy loam, with a little peat, mixed with pulverized brick rubbish. Water must be given cautiously. Young plants may be taken off the parent in October and pressed firmly, but without bruising them, in light, rich soil. Cuttings should be left for a few days to dry before planting. They flower in autumn. In winter keep them in a cold frame, and as dry as possible. Height, 1 foot to 2 feet. Echinacea purpurea, purple coneflower, a stately hardy perennial, very pretty when in flower, but hardly suitable for cutting purposes. It likes a rich, light, loam soil and plenty of sunshine. The roots may be divided in spring, after growth has fairly started. It blooms during September and October. Height, 2–1/2 feet. Echinops, globe thistle, coarse perennial plants, of stiff growth. Any soil suits them, and they may be increased by dividing the roots. They bloom in July. Height, 4 feet. Echium creticum. A scarlet flowering hardy annual which should be grown wherever bees are kept. Sow in spring in any garden soil. Height, 1–1/2 feet. Edelweiss-Xenophilium. Hydraeanthus dalmaticus. A charming little herbaceous perennial which proves quite hardy in our climate, and well deserves a place in the rockery. Plant in deep, rich loam, and cover the surface of the crown with ½ inch of coarse sand. It may be propagated from offsets, taken with as much root as possible as soon as flowering ceases. Winter the young plants in a cold frame, and do not give them too much water, or they will rot. They will bloom in July and August. Height, 4 inches. Eggplant, aubergine. The fruit of the eggplant is edible. The seed is sown in March or April in pots of well-drained, light, rich soil, and placed in a cucumber frame or on a hotbed with a temperature of 75 degrees. When the plants are fairly up they are potted off separately, and when they have started into growth the points are table of contents pinched out, so as to induce a bushy habit. It is necessary to keep the roots well supplied with water. When the fruit is set, the growth is stopped at the first joint beyond it. They are mostly treated as greenhouse pot plants, but may be grown in the open if planted on a south border, in ridges like those made for cucumbers, and covered with hand glasses till established. The aubergine is a tender annual. Height, 2 feet. Eggs of insects, to destroy into 3 gallons of water stir 1/4 peck of lime, ½ pound of sulfur, and ½ pound of tobacco. When settled, syringe the trees and walls with the clear liquid. More water may be added afterwards. Eichhornia crassipes major. A pretty and curious plant which may be grown in bowls of water like the Chinese lily. The stalks are bladders about the size of a green gauge, which enable the plant to float. The flowers are soft lilac rose in color, and sparkle as if polished, each one being about 2 inches in diameter. A little soil at the bottom of the bowl is beneficial. It will flourish out of doors in summer. Elder C. sambucus. Elaeagnus. Effective variegated shrubs which prove perfectly hardy in the south of England. They grow in any ordinary soil, and are increased by cuttings. Height, 10 feet L. Scholtzia cristata hardy annuals of great value where there are bees, the flowers being very sweet. Sow in the open in spring. Height, 1 foot. Empitrum small hardy evergreen shrubs requiring an elevated and exposed position, and a dry, barren soil. They flower in May, and are propagated by layers. Height, 1 foot. Endive. Sow at intervals from May till the end of August, but the principal sowing, to stand the winter, should be made the first week in August, giving the plants the protection of a frame. When the early sown ones are 2 inches high, transplant them to a rich nursery bed. When 4 in high, lift them carefully, with the soil round the roots, and place them in drills about 3 inches deep and 1/4 apart each way. Water well immediately after planting, and keep the soil moist. Epacrae pretty heath-like shrubs. They like a sandy peat soil, and plenty of moisture. The pots in which they grow should be provided with ample drainage and stood in a larger sized pot, with wet moss between the two. As soon they have done blooming, cut them back freely, and when the fresh shoots are 2 or 3 inches long, pot them off, placing them in a close, cool pit for 3 or 4 weeks. Gradually harden off, then place them in a sunny situation out of doors, and remove them to the conservatory in October. They only need sufficient heat to keep out the frost. Cuttings of the young wood placed in sand with a little bottom heat will strike. Table of contents. Epigeorapans, creeping laurel. This creeper is hardy and evergreen, and its flowers possess a delicious fragrance. It may be grown in loam and sandy peat or in leaf mold with a little sand added, in a well-sheltered and moist situation, and may be propagated by layers, in the same manner as carnations. It flowers in April. Height, 6 inches. Epilobium angustifolium. An ornamental herbaceous plant which may be grown in any common soil from seed sown in autumn, or may be increased by division of the roots. It puts forth its flowers in July. Height, 4 feet. Epimedium an elegant hardy perennial, suitable for shaded borders or rockwork. The best soil for it is sandy peat. It flowers between April and June, and is increased by dividing the root. Height, 1 foot. Eragrostis elegans, love grass. One of the best of our hardy, annual, ornamental grasses. Sown in March, it will reach perfection in August or September. Height, 1 foot. Aranthus hyemulus c. winter aconite. Aramuris robustus this hardy perennial bears tall, handsome spikes of sweetly scented, peach-colored flowers in May. It will grow in any ordinary soil, and is easily propagated by young plants from the roots. Height, I foot. Ericas, heaths. It is useless to attempt to grow these beautiful shrubs unless proper soil is provided. The free-growing kinds thrive best in good black peat and require large pots. The dwarf and hard-wooded kinds must be provided with sandy peat, and the pots thoroughly well drained. They need less water than the free-growing kinds. They all want a good deal of air, and must not be crowded too closely together. Protect from frost and damp. Cuttings off the tender tops of the shoots planted in sand under glass will strike. The cuttings of the stronger growing kinds should be somewhat longer. As soon as rooted, pot off singly, place in a close frame, and harden off by degrees. The hardy sorts grow in a sandy peat, and may be increased by layers or by cuttings. They bloom at various times. Height, 6 inches to 4 feet. Sea heaths, greenhouse. Erigeron very handsome hardy perennials, producing a copious display of bloom. They will grow in any soil, and may be increased by division or by seed sown between March and July, or in August or September. They flower at the end of July. Height, 1 foot. Erinus. The hardy perennial kinds bloom in March, the greenhouse varieties in May. The latter are very pretty. They all like a sandy soil, and may be increased by seed or by division. Height, 6 inches to 9 in. Eriogonum these pretty, hardy, herbaceous plants bloom in June. They grow best in a compost of loam and peat, and are easily raised from table of contents seed. Height, 1-1/2 feet. Eriostemon - greenhouse evergreen shrubs. Grow in sandy peat with a little loam added. Cuttings will strike in sand. They flower in May and June. Height, 2 feet to 3 feet. Erodium - an extensive genus of very beautiful plants, mostly hardy. They will grow in any soil, and merely require ordinary treatment. The bloom is produced in June or July. Height, 4 inches to 1 foot. Eryngium - a very ornamental and beautiful kind of thistle. They are mostly quite hardy, and will grow in any garden soil, though they thrive best in a light, sandy one. The greenhouse and frame varieties should be grown in pots, so that they can be easily housed in winter. They are readily increased by seed or division, and produce their flowers in July. Height, 1 foot to 4 feet. Erysimum - flowers of little merit. The herbaceous kinds thrive in common soil, but do best in a mixture of loam and peat. They may be increased by cuttings placed under glass. The annuals and biennials merely need sowing in the open during autumn. They bloom in June and July. Height, 1-1/2 feet to 2 feet. Erythrina christogalli, coral plant, a showy, summer blooming greenhouse plant. Place it in turfy loam enriched with old manure. It may be transferred to the garden in the summer, and when the wood is ripe cut it back and keep it dry till spring. Cuttings taken at a joint, with the leaves left on, may be struck in sand. Erythronium denscanus, dog's tooth violets, sea violets. Escallonia. Handsome, half-hardy, evergreen shrubs, possessing rich glaucous leaves and bunches of tubular flowers. A peat and sandy loam soil suits them best. They may be planted against, and trained to, a south wall, but need protection from frost. The laterals may be cut back fairly close in March to encourage new growth. They may be propagated by layering in the autumn, or by suckers taken in the spring. Height, 3 feet. Eschscholtzia - pretty hardy annuals, especially during August, when they are in flower. Any rich soil suits them. Easily raised from seed sown on a gentle hotbed in spring, and afterwards transplanted to the border. They flower longest if sown in autumn, but the young plants need protection through the winter. Height, 1 foot. Eucalyptus citriodora. A useful window or greenhouse plant, with small, oblong, bright green leaves, furnished with appendages that emit an odor resembling the lemon-scented verbena. It is of easy cultivation, growing freely from seed sown in slight heat. Height, 4 feet. Eucalyptus globulus. A greenhouse everlasting tree, commonly known as blue gum. It delights in a mixture of peat, loam, and sand. Cuttings, table of contents which should not be too ripe, root in sand under glass. It may be grown from seed sown, in a temperature of 65 degrees, from February to April. It flowers in June. Eucharidium - pretty little hardy annuals, nearly allied to the Clarkia. The seed may be sown in autumn for early flowering, or in spring for blooming in July. Height, 1 foot. Eucumbus punctata. A fine, autumn blooming plant, bearing long spikes of fragrant creamy white flowers and curiously spotted stems. It may be grown in any rich soil. Height, 2 feet. Eucryphia pinnatify, a dwarf evergreen shrub with flowers resembling a white St. John's wort. It grows best in a compost of loam and peat, and is propagated by cuttings planted in sand, and subjected to heat. Eugenia ugni - an evergreen shrub which produces white flowers in May, succeeded by round, edible berries. It should be grown in loam and peat. Ripened cuttings may be struck in sand under glass. Height, 4 feet. Eulalia japonica - a hardy perennial giant grass. It is very handsome as single specimens on lawns, or used in groups on the margins of shrubberies. The flower panicles in their first stage have erect branches, but as the flowers open these curl over gracefully, resembling a Prince of Wales feather. Height, 6 feet. Euonymus radicans variegata. A hardy evergreen shrub which, given a sunny situation, will grow in any soil, though a rich, sandy one is preferable. It may be increased by layers, by seed, by cuttings of ripe wood taken early in autumn and planted in the shade, or by dividing strong roots. May is its time to flower. Height, 6 feet. Other varieties of the euonymus, or spindle tree, are equally hardy, and easy to propagate. Eupatoria moderatum - a greenhouse shrub which bears sweet-scented white flowers in August, continuing in bloom for a long while. It may be planted out at the end of May, but must be lifted before the frost comes. When flowering ceases, give less water and prune hard back. It grows well in peat and loam, and is increased by seed or by cuttings of the young shoots in spring in bottom heat. Pinch back freely until the end of July, leaving all growth after that period. Height, 2-1/2 foot. Euphorbia - an elegant class of plants. The stove and greenhouse varieties are generally succulent, and require but little water, while the hardy kinds need plenty of moisture. Any rich, light soil suits them, but for the tender, succulent plants it should be mixed with brick rubbish. Best grown from seed, though the roots may be divided. Height, 2 feet. Urea latifolia variegata. A fine, variegated, large-leaved table of contents evergreen, very suitable for covering a low wall, or for conservatory decoration. It delights in a compost of loam and peat, and is propagated by cuttings planted in a sandy soil on gentle heat. Height, 2 feet. Eurybia. Very pretty flowering shrubs for walls, borders, or rock areas. They require a light, rich soil, and may be increased by seed sown early in spring on a gentle hotbed. Height, 2 feet. Eutaxia myrtifolia - pretty evergreen shrubs, suitable for the greenhouse. They thrive best in a mixture of peat and loam, and require the pots to be well drained. To have nice bushy plants they must be pinched back well. Cuttings will strike in sand under glass. They flower in August. Height, 1-1/2 feet. Eutoca - exceedingly pretty hardy annuals. Sow the seed in light soil early in spring where it is to flower, and thin out so that the plants have plenty of room. They bloom in July. Height, 1-1/2 feet. Evening primrose - C. Enothera. Everlasting peas - C. Peas, everlasting. F. Fabaceae - C. Thermosis. Fatsia japonica. C. Aralia. Feathergrass - C. Stipa pennata. Fennel - sow the seed in April, cover lightly with fine mold, and when the plants are strong enough set them out 1 foot apart. Cut off the flower stalks as soon as they appear, to prevent them running to seed. The bed will last for years. See also Ferula. Fenslia - elegant half-hardy annuals. Sow the seed on a peat soil. If this be done in autumn, they will flower in April or May. If sown in spring, they will bloom in autumn. Height, 6 inches. Ferns. Most ferns delight in a loose soil, an abundance of moisture, and a warm, humid atmosphere. The stove and greenhouse kinds are best cultivated in a mixture of sandy loam and peat. The hardy kinds grow best among rockwork or in a shady border. A light, sandy soil suits them. They may be increased by dividing the roots. Ferns from seed - collect the spore fronds towards the end of summer, just as the spore cases begin to open. Place them on a sheet of paper in a box for a few days, keeping it in a dry place. Most of the spores will fall out, the others may be rubbed out with the hand. These spores will keep good a long time, but are best sown within a year. Table of contents: fill the pots with good heavy loam, water freely, and apply a coating of charcoal, coarse sand, and sphagnum moss, rubbed through a fine sieve. Damp the surface, sow the spores thinly, and cover with glass. Keep the soil moist by standing the pots for a time each day up to their rim in water. No surface water should be given. Stand the pots in a warm, light place in the greenhouse, but keep them shaded from the sun. When the surface is covered with growth, prick out into pans or boxes, using a rich, light soil. When they are large enough, pot them off singly in thumb pots, repotting as soon as these are filled with roots. Ferraria-C tigridia. Ferula, giant fennel, dot. Strong growing, hardy, herbaceous plants. F. gigantea has bright, glistening foliage, changing to a brilliant orange, and attains a height of 8 feet or 10 feet. F. tingitana is very stately and graceful, growing 4 feet high. They are easily raised from seed, will grow in any garden soil, and flower in August and September. Festica, an annual ornamental grass, which is grown best on a loamy soil. Sow the seed in March, and keep moist till it germinates. Height, 1 foot. Feverfew. This hardy perennial will grow in any soil and ripen its seed freely. Young plants, obtained by sowing the seed early in spring, are very useful for edgings, when planted alternately with, or in proximity to, lobila. A pretty effect is produced. Ficaria grandiflora. A hardy perennial which thrives well when planted under the shade of trees. It is increased by separating the tubers in autumn, and produces its flowers in May. Height, 6 inches. Ficus elastica, India rubber plant. This thrives well in any light, rich soil, or in loam and peat. Keep it moderately moist throughout the winter, using tepid water. In summer any of the artificial manures may be used. Sponge the leaves once a week to free them from dust, and keep the plant well sheltered from drafts. Cuttings with uninjured leaves will root in autumn in sand with a bottom heat of 65 or 75 degrees, or the cuttings may be taken in spring, stem rooting the slips. It flowers in May, and sometimes attains the height of 20 feet. Fig palm-C aralia. Figs. Though in some parts of our country figs are cropped on standards, as a rule they require to be trained on a wall having a southern exposure. The soil should be a fairly good loam mixed with old mortar and crushed bones, but no manure is needed. The end of March or the beginning of April is the most favorable time for planting. The trees should be firmly set, and the surface of the soil kept moist until they are established. Manure may be given preferably in a liquid state when heavy crops of fruit are being born. Old and table of contents exhausted wood may be cut away in April, but the knife must be used sparingly. The branches should be trained to a distance of 10 inches apart, and the fruit-bearing shoots may be pinched back with the thumb and finger at the end of August. The fruit is born on the previous year's growth. They may be increased by layers, by suckers, or by cuttings of the young wood placed in sand and plunged in a bottom heat under glass. Brown Turkey, Black Ischia, Yellow Ischia, White Marseilles, Brunswick, and St. John's are all good varieties for open-air cultivation, or for growing in houses. When grown under glass, figs may be trained on trellises near the roof of the house, or may be planted in tubs or pots, not allowing too much root room. At starting the temperature in the day should be about 60 degrees, and at night 55 degrees. More heat can be given as the plants advance, keeping up a moist atmosphere, but taking care not to give too much water to the roots. By pinching off the points of the shoots when they have made 5 or 6 leaves, a second crop of fruit will be obtained. Use the knife upon them as little as possible. When the fruit begins to ripen, admit air, and as soon as it is gathered, give liquid manure to the roots every other day to encourage a second crop. When the plants are at rest they need hardly any water. Filberts and cob nuts. These nuts will succeed on any soil that is not cold or wet. The bushes should be planted in October, when the leaves have nearly all fallen. Make the soil firm about the roots and give a mulching of stable manure. At the beginning of April the old and exhausted wood may be cut away, as well as any branches that obstruct light and air. Encourage well-balanced heads to the bushes by cutting back any branch that grows too vigorously, and remove all suckers as they make an appearance, except they are required for transplanting. The crop is produced on the small wood. The best method of propagation is by layers in November or any time before the buds swell in spring. The process is simple, it merely requiring a notch to be made in a branch of 2 or 3 years growth, which is then pegged down 2 or 3 inches below the surface. The following autumn it may be cut away from its parent, pruned, and planted. They may also be grown from nuts sown in autumn and transplanted when 2 years old. In Kent the bushes are kept low and widespreading, by which means the harvest is more readily reaped. On a fairly good soil they should stand from 10 to 14 feet apart. Lambert's filberts, frizzled filberts, purple filberts are good varieties, the former two bearing abundantly. Among the best of the cobs may be mentioned the Great Cob and Merveille de Bolwiller. Firethorn-C crataegus. Fleabane-C inula and stenactus. Flower pots, sizes of various practices prevail at different potteries, but the appended names and sizes are generally adopted. In every case the inside measurement is taken. Inches table of contents sizes. Across top. Deep. Thimbles 2 thumbs 2 1/2 2 1/2 60s, 60s, 3 1/2 54s, 54s, 4 48s, 48s, 4 1/2 5 32s, 32s, 6 24s, 24s, 8 1/2 8 16s, 16s, 9 1/2 9 12s, 12s, 11 1/2 10 8s, 8s, 12 11 6s, SIXS, 13 11 4s, 4s, 15 13 3s, 3s, 17 13 2s, 2. 18 14 foam flower-C tiarella. Fontanesia filariioides - This shrub will grow in any soil, but needs protection in severe weather. It may be propagated by layers or by cuttings planted under glass. August is its time for flowering. Height, 10 feet. Forget-me-not - C. myosotis. Forsythia - Any good soil suits these pretty shrubs. F. suspensa thrives best under greenhouse treatment, but F. viridissima is quite hardy. The former flowers in March, the latter in February. They may be increased by layers or cuttings. Height, 10 feet. Foxglove - C. digitalis. Fragaria indica, ornamental strawberry, A rich or peaty mold suits this half-hardy perennial. It may be saved through the winter by protecting the roots, but seed sown in spring will generally fruit the same year. It flowers in July. Height, 1 foot. Franco. Hardy perennials bearing white flowers from June to September. They like a good, warm soil. The only way of raising them is from seed. They require a slight protection in winter. Height, 2 1/2 feet. Fraxinella, dictamnus, This ornamental hardy perennial is commonly known as the burning bush. It succeeds in any garden soil, and is easily raised from seed, which ripens freely. If the flowers are rubbed they emit a fine odor. It blooms in June. Height, 3 feet. Phrygia - Remarkably pretty and graceful cape flowers, possessing a most agreeable perfume. The plants grow about 9 inches high and produce 6 or 8 tubular flowers on a stem. They are easily cultivated in a cool greenhouse, frame, or window, and are invaluable for cutting, the long sprays lasting from 2 to 3 weeks in water. The bulbs table of contents should be planted early in the spring in rich, very sandy soil, and given the protection of a cold frame in the winter. By successional plantings they may be had in bloom from January to May. Put 6 to 12 bulbs in a 4 inches or 8 in pot, place in a sunny position in a cold frame, and cover with damp cinder ashes to keep them fairly moist. When growth has begun and the pots are full of roots, remove the covering of ashes, but keep the pots in the frame, giving a little ventilation when the weather is mild, and watering carefully when the soil appears dry. Protect from frost by a covering of mats. For early flowering remove the plants to a warm greenhouse when the flower spikes appear, keeping them as near the glass as possible. When the buds are developed an occasional application of weak liquid manure will prove beneficial. Vermontia californica. A beautiful and somewhat singular wall shrub, with large yellow flowers. Any soil is suitable for it, but a south or west aspect is indispensable. Fringe tree - Cekiananthus. Fritillarias, crown imperials, or snake's head lilies, Soil, sandy loam, or well-drained, deep, rich mold. Plant in the open ground in autumn, Take the bulbs up as soon as the leaves decay, and preserve them in a rather moist place. Increased by offsets taken from the old roots every third year. They are not so suitable for pot culture as for outdoor decoration. They are quite hardy, and flower in the spring, bearing clusters of pendant bell-shaped flowers surrounded with tufts of fresh green leaves. F. meleagris are of dwarf, slender growth, and bear in early spring elegant pendant flowers of various shades netted and marked with darker colors. These are suitable for either the border or pots. Plant in autumn. Fruit trees, the pruning of cut away all growths that have an inward tendency, and do not allow any shoot to cross over or come in contact with another, also keep the centers of the trees or bushes open. The fruit of trees thus treated is not so liable to be blown down by the wind, and the sun can more readily ripen it. If the ground is poor, a dressing of rotted manure worked into the soil will be beneficial to the roots. Fuchsias - these like a warm and moist atmosphere. The hardy sorts do well out of doors in rich, light soil. On the approach of frost, cut them down and cover the roots with 3 or 4 inches of coal dust, ashes, or moss. Remove the ashes in April and thin out the shoots in May. They will also grow well from cuttings taken off the old wood as soon as they are 1 inch long, inserted in sand and placed under glass, or plunged in dung at a temperature of 60 degrees. Cuttings will also strike in loam and leaf mold. If grown in pots, take them indoors before the frosty weather begins, and give them very little or no water at all during the winter. Keep them in a cool place, yet free from frost. Repot them in the spring, trimming the branches and table of contents roots, and making a compost for them of 1/2 mellow yellow loam, 1/4 leaf mold, and 1/4 old manure. Place them in a frame with bottom heat, and water and syringe them moderately while they are growing. When they are in full growth, never give them plain water, but always plenty of liquid manure. Fumitory - C. corydalis. Funkia. Ornamental plants which delight in a deep, light soil and a warm, moist situation, without which they will not flower. They are increased by division, which should not be too severe, and bloom in July and August. Height, 1½ feet. Furze - enjoys a sandy soil. Increased by cuttings taken in spring or autumn and placed in a shady border under hand glasses. It is of evergreen habit, and forms a dense and highly ornamental hedge. See also Ulex. G. gages - the cultivation of gages is similar to that of plums. In the open they may be grown as dwarfs or pyramids, and in orchard houses as gridirons, cordons, or in pots. The chief points to observe are to thin the branches in order to admit plenty of light into the middle of the tree, thus inducing the production of a plentiful supply of fruit spurs, and to occasionally lift and root prune the tree if growing too strong. Among the choicest sorts are, Bone Bouche, producing its fruit at the end of August, Coe's Golden Drop, end of September, Old Green Gage, August, Guthrie's Late Green Gage, September, M. Laughlin's Gage, end of August, Bullen's Golden Gage, end of August, and Rainclaw de Bavay, beginning ng of October. Gaillardia, blanket flower, very ornamental flowers, which will grow in any common soil, but thrive most in a light, rich one. Seeds of the annual kinds are sown in the spring. The perennials are increased by dividing the roots. Bloom in July. Height, 1 foot to 2 feet. Galandus. See snowdrops. Galaxaphylla, wand plant, the heart-shaped galax is a charming little plant for rock work. It is perennial, and does not lose the old leaves till the new ones appear. A rich, light mold is required for its growth, and its situation should be a somewhat shady one. Its flowers are borne in July and August, on stalks 1 foot or more high. The plant may be increased by taking up a strong clump, shaking it apart, and transplanting at once. See also Shortia. Galaga, goat's rue, ornamental hardy perennials, requiring plenty of room. They are readily increased by seed or division of the root, and flower in July. Height, 3 feet to 4 feet. Table of contents. Galium – This hardy herbaceous plant blooms in July. It will grow in any soil, and can be increased by division of the root. Height, 1 foot. Gardenias. Plant in a hothouse in fibrous peat mixed with a large proportion of sand. Give plenty of heat and moisture during growth, with a thin shade to keep off the sun's midday rays. Lower the temperature as soon as growth is completed, and in the middle of summer stand the plants out in the open for a week or two for the wood to ripen. Height, 3 feet. Garlic – Plant small cloves from February to April in rows 9 inches apart and 6 inches from each other in the row. Lift them when the leaves die down, dry them in the sunshine, and store in an airy, cool shed. Garrya elliptica – A hardy evergreen shrub, which is very suitable in its early stages for pot culture. A light, loamy soil is what it likes. Cuttings taken in August and placed in sand under a hand glass will strike freely, but it is most readily increased by layers. In October it bears graceful yellowish-green tassels of flowers from the ends of its shoots. Height, 6 feet. Gasteria varicosa. This plant grows best in pots of turfy loam and leaf mold, to which has been added a little old mortar. Good drainage is essential. Water freely in summer, and keep just moist in winter. Keep the foliage clean by sponging. Give plenty of light, and during warm weather turn the plants out of doors. Gastrolobium – Elegant evergreen shrubs which flower in April and May. They are most suitable for adorning the greenhouse, and grow best in a soil of loamy peat and sand. Cuttings of half-ripened wood planted under glass will take root. Height, 2 feet. Gaultheria – Dwarf, creeping evergreen shrubs, having dark foliage and producing white flowers in May, June, or July. They require to be grown in peat, and are increased by layers. G. procumbens is suitable for rock eyries, as it only grows to the height of 6 inches. G. chalon attains the height of 2 feet. Gauroland hymeri – This free-flowering, hardy, herbaceous plant will thrive in any light, rich soil. It bears elegant spikes of white flowers from May onwards, followed by red bracts in September, and is readily propagated by seeds. Height, 4 feet. Gazania splendens – A showy greenhouse plant. It may be planted in the open in warm positions, but will require protecting in winter. Grow it in peat and loam. Cuttings will strike if placed in sand under glass. It flowers in July. Height, 1 foot. Genethalis – Greenhouse evergreen shrubs which thrive best in sandy loam and peat. Cuttings of the young wood planted in the same soil and plunged in heat will take root. Their flowering season is in August. Height, 3 feet. Table of contents. Genista, broom, G. canariense is an exceedingly ornamental and free-flowering greenhouse shrub. It should be planted in a mixture of loam, peat, and sand. Young cuttings inserted in sand under a glass take root readily. It blooms in June. Height, 2 feet. Hardy species of Genista may be placed in the front of shrubberies. They are increased by seeds or by layers. Gentians – The herbaceous kinds do best in a light, rich soil, such as loam and peat mixed with vegetable mold. The annuals are raised from seed sown as soon as it is ripe. If left till spring before it is sown it will probably not come up till the second year. The perennials are increased by dividing the roots. Both of the latter kinds do best in a dry, sandy soil. Gentiana acaulis, or Gentianella, is very suitable for edgings, or for rock work. It is an evergreen creeper, and bears large trumpet-shaped flowers of rich ultramarine blue. All the gentians need plenty of free air, and some of them moisture at the roots. Bloom in July. Height, 4 inches to 2 feet. Geranium argenteum, silvery cranesbill, This hardy perennial alpine is very effective on rockwork, especially in front of dark stones, but provision must be made for its long taproots. A rich, deep loam suits it well. Its seeds germinate freely when sown in peat and sand. Flowers are born from May to July. Height, 6 inches. Geraniums – Take cuttings in July or August, and let them heat to partially dry for 24 hours before planting. When rooted, pot them off in 60s, and keep them under glass during the winter at a temperature of 55 degrees. If the cuttings are taken in September, put 3 or 4 slips in a 48 size pot. In the spring they should be repotted singly and hardened off as early as possible. A suitable soil for them is made by mixing 2 parts of good turfy loam, 1 of leaf mold, 1 of well-decomposed cow dung, and a good proportion of silver sand. Bone dust is an excellent addition to the soil. Old plants stripped of their leaves may be packed in sand during the winter, and repotted in spring. Gerardia - These hardy perennials form pyramidal bushes bearing penstemon-like flowers, thickly set and varying in color from light pink to dark purple. A peat soil suits them best. They may be propagated by cuttings placed under glass, but are best grown from seed. July is their flowering season. Height, 1 foot to 2 feet. German seeds. These require to be sown in a cold frame in seed pans, in the greenhouse, or under a hand glass, in good, rich compost, composed of old turf, leaf mold, some well-rotted manure, and silver sand. The seeds should be sown thinly and watered sparingly. Sow early in April, and transplant in the middle or end of May in rich soil. Water occasionally with weak liquid manure. Gesneria - Handsome greenhouse perennials. They thrive in any light, rich soil. Cuttings will strike readily either in sand or soil if placed under glass in heat. They may also be raised from seed sown in a temperature of 75 degrees in March or April. They flower in October. Table of contents. Height, 18 inches. GM - Very handsome hardy perennials. They grow well in any light, rich, loamy soil, and may be increased either by seeds or by dividing the roots. G. coccineum is extremely pretty. Flower in July. Height, 18 inches. Gherkins - Sow the seed the first week in April in small pots, and cover it lightly with fine soil. Plunge the pots in a hotbed covered with a frame. When grown to nice little plants, remove them to a cold frame to harden, and plant them out on a warm border towards the end of May. When the fruit begins to form, give liquid manure twice a week. For pickling they must be cut while small. Gilead - Extremely pretty and free-flowering hardy annuals, deserving of a place in every garden. They are very suitable for small beds. They should be sown in the open early in spring. G. tricolor may be sown in autumn. Bloom in July. Height, 1 foot. Gillenia trifoliata. The 3-leaved Gillenia is a hardy herbaceous perennial which is very useful as a cut flower for the decoration of vases, etc. It should be grown in large clumps, delights in a deep, moist soil and partial shade, and may be propagated by dividing the roots early in spring. It lasts in bloom from June to August. Height, 1 foot. Gladiolus - Dig the ground out to a depth of 1 foot or 15 inches, put in a layer of leaf mold or rotted manure, and then 4 or 5 inches of earth mixed with sand. Insert the bulbs, 6 inches from the surface and 9 inches apart, cover them with 1 inch of sand, and fill up with earth. In frosty weather cover with a thick layer of litter. Give plenty of water when they begin to throw up their flower stems. They may be planted at any time between December and the end of March. If planted late in the season, a depth of 3 or 4 inches is enough. The roots must be kept dry in winter. They are increased by offsets, taken when the bulbs are removed from the ground after the leaves have turned yellow. These should be planted at once in well-drained earth. If early flowers are required, plant the old bulbs in pots, 3 to 6 bulbs being placed in a 5 inches pot, any time between December and March. Give them frame culture up to the second week in May, when they may be transferred to the border. The flowers are invaluable for vase decoration. Glossium flavum tricolor, hardy horn poppy. The large, brilliant, orange-red flowers of this plant are very effective in the border, and the bloom is continuous during the greater part of the summer. The seed is rather slow to germinate, but when sown in the open ground in autumn, It blooms from June to August. When sown in early spring it flowers from July to September. Height, 2 feet. Glomaritema, sea milkweed. A pretty little hardy trailing plant bearing flesh-colored flowers in June and July. It grows in sandy loam, and is raised from seed sown in spring. Height, 3 inches. Table of contents. Globe Amaranthus, Gomphrena. This tender annual is well known for its clover-like heads of everlasting flowers. It will grow in any rich soil, but to produce really fine plants, much attention must be given to shifting, watering, etc. Increased by seed in the same manner as other tender annuals. Blooms in July. Height, 1 foot. Globe flower C. Trallius. Globe thistle C. Echinops. Globularia trichosantha A pretty dwarf perennial rock plant bearing pale blue flowers in May and June. It is hardy, thrives in light, sandy soil, and is increased by either seeds or cuttings planted in sand. Height, 6 inches. The greenhouse varieties of Globularia grow best in loam and peat. Glory of the snow C. Cyanodoxa. Gloxinias A very ornamental family of tuberous-rooted hothouse plants. They are of 2 classes, the drooping and the erect. Pot at any time during January and March in a mixture of equal quantities of loam, peat, and sand, with the addition of a little vegetable soil, and place in a warm, 60 degrees, moist temperature, where they can be favored with a little shade. In summer supply the roots plentifully with water, but give them very little in winter. Overhead watering is likely to rot the leaves and flowers. G. maculata is increased by division. The leaves of most of the others, if taken off close to the stem, and planted, will soon make young plants. They may be raised from seed sown from March to July in a hothouse or frame having a temperature of 65 to 75 degrees. They flower in June, and on into September. Height, 6 inches. To 1 foot. Glycine C. Wisteria and Apios. Gnaphalium, Edelweiss. Hardy everlasting flowers, which are covered with a woolly substance. They may be grown in any light, rich soil. The shrubby and herbaceous kinds may be increased by cuttings or division. The annuals are easily raised from seed. They flower in July. Height, 1 foot. Goat's rue C. Galaga. Gadicea very pretty hardy annuals, that may be grown in any garden soil. Sow in the autumn for early flowering, or in spring for later blooms. July is their ordinary season of coming into flower. Height, 1½ feet to 2 feet. Golden feather hardy annual foliage plants. They are not particular as to soil, and are easily raised from seed sown early in spring. They bloom in July. Height, 1 foot. Goldenrod C. Solidago. Table of contents. Gompholobium delicate greenhouse evergreen shrubs requiring a soil of sandy loam and peat and but little water. They flower in June, and are propagated by cuttings planted in sand under glass. Height, 2 feet. Gomphrena C. Globe Amaranthus. Gooseberries from the middle of October to the end of November is the best time for planting. To produce good crops the soil should be rich, deep, and well drained. The position should be somewhat cool and sheltered, and a liberal quantity of liquid manure is beneficial. In dry seasons mulching may be resorted to with advantage. Cuttings are taken in autumn as soon as the leaves begin to fall. Select strong shoots about 1 foot long. Cut the bottom end straight across, just below a joint, and with a sharp knife remove all the buds or eyes from the base to within a couple of inches of the top, so as to prevent the formation of suckers. Plant the shoots firmly 3 inches deep, in rows 1 foot apart and 6 inches apart in the rows, on a north border. At the end of the second season cut back all leading shoots to 2/3 of their length. In after years remove weak and superfluous branches, as also any that are growing near the ground, but plenty of young wood must always be left on the bushes. The pruning may be done either in spring or autumn. The following varieties may be recommended: red, white, and yellow champagne, Wilmot's Early Red, Golden Drop, Ironmonger, and Warrington Red for dessert. While for preserving and culinary purposes Old Rough Red, Conquering Hero, Favorite, Broom Girl, British Crown, Ironsides, Lady Leicester, Thumper, Green Walnut, Leader, and Moreton Hero may be classed among the leading varieties. When grown in bush form, ample room must be allowed between each to enable one to get round the bushes to gather the fruit. Gooseberry Caterpillar. To prevent caterpillars attacking gooseberries, syringe the bushes with a decoction of common foxglove, digitalis, or dust the leaves with hellebore powder. If the caterpillar has begun its attack, sprinkle some fresh lime below the bushes, and shake the bushes vigorously, so that the insects are dislodged. Gorse-Culex. Gourds-sow at the end of March or the beginning of April on a slight hotbed. Pot off when the plants are sufficiently advanced, and transplant to the open border in June. They are well adapted for arbors, trellis work, or sloping banks. The following are among the most ornamental: Ababur viridiflora, Benincasa syrifer, waxgourd, Bryonopsis erythrocarpa, Coccinea indica, scarlet fruit, Cucumis anguinus, serpent gourd, Cucumis dipsaceus, teasel gourd, Cucumis dudame, balloon gourd, Cucumis erinaceus, hedgehog gourd, Cucu. Miss Graciloroides, gooseberry gourd, Cucumis perennis, Cucurbita argyrosperma, Cucurbita melopepo, Cyclanthera explodens, bombshell gourd, Cyclanthera pedita, Eopepin aurantiacum, Eopepin vidifolius, Lagenaria clavata, club gourd, Lagenaria enormis, Lagenaria leucantha depressa, Lagenaria L. Leucantha longissima, Lagenaria plate de course. Table of contents: Lagenaria poira pudra, Lagenaria siphon, Lupha cylindrica, Lupha saliqua, Melothria scabra, Mammordica balsamina, Mammordica carantia, Mammordica elaterium, Mokia scabrella, Scatanthus tubiflorus, Trichosanthus anguina, tr. Icosanthus coccinea, Trichosanthus colubrina, and Trichosanthus palmata. Grafting. The objects of grafting are to bring a bush or tree into an earlier state of bearing than it would do naturally, to produce good fruit from an inferior plant, and to save space by putting dwarf scions onto rampant growing trees. By the process of uniting strong growing trees to those of a weaker nature, their exuberance is checked, and weaker ones are improved by being worked on those of a stronger growth. Whatever form of grafting is adopted, the inner layers of the bark of the stock or tree on which the operation is performed, must be brought into direct contact with the inner layers of the bark of the branch which is grafted, or, as it is called, the scion. This scion should be a branch of the early growth of the previous year's wood, and should be in the same state of vegetation as the stock. If the scion is in a more advanced state than the stock, its growth may be stopped by cutting it off and burying it in the earth under a north wall until the stock has advanced sufficiently in growth. Grafting of all kinds is best done in March, when the sap is flowing freely. Many methods of grafting are adopted, the following being the principal: whip or tongue grafting is suitable for almost any description of trees. Saw the stock off level at any desired height, then make a deep upward slanting cut through the bark at the top 2 or 3 inches in length, and in the middle of the cut turn the knife downwards and cut out a thin wedge-shaped socket. Next cut the scion in a similar manner so that it will fit exactly into the incision of the stock, bringing the bark of each into direct contact. Bind it firmly in position, and cover it over, from the top of the stock to the bottom of the scion, with grafting wax or clay. When the scion and the stock are united, which is demonstrated by the former making growth, remove the wax and cut away all shoots that may be produced on the stock.